Did you know the CIA once experimented on ordinary people, turning their minds into weapons without their consent? Most didn't even know it. Most never imagined that their lives, their very sense of reality, could be stolen from them in the name of secrecy. It began quietly, in the 1950s, in sterile laboratories hidden behind unmarked doors, college campuses, quiet suburbs, even downtown offices. Ordinary people became subjects of a terrifying experiment that spanned decades. They signed forms for medical studies, personality research, or drug trials. No one ever mentioned that the substances they were consuming could dismantle their very minds. Michael Turner, a bright-eyed philosophy student, walked into the lab thinking he was participating in a routine study. He laughed nervously with other students, unaware that the papers he signed were effectively a blank check for the CIA to explore the deepest recesses of his consciousness. At first, it was subtle. They gave him tablets for concentration. They asked questions about dreams, memories, and fears. A psychiatrist's friendly voice guided him into hypnosis, promising insight and self-discovery. But then the nightmares began. Michael awoke in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, seeing shadows move in ways that made no sense. The words in his textbooks shifted and twisted when he tried to read them. He began to forget small things, like the color of his notebook or the way to his dorm. And Michael wasn't alone. Across the country, unsuspecting civilians experienced the same insidious intrusion. Housewives, taxi drivers, postal workers, teachers, all ordinary lives were being quietly invaded. The methods were diverse: LSD to dissolve mental barriers, sensory deprivation to confuse the mind, and psychological torture so refined it left no visible scars. The scientists involved spoke of potential and national security. They reassured themselves with euphemisms: subject, experiment, data point. Meanwhile, each human mind they touched became a battlefield. Some began hearing voices that whispered dark things in the dead of night. Others had their memories erased entirely, leaving gaping holes where lives used to be. No one outside the walls knew. No one outside could see. But inside, horror was growing quietly, invisibly, like a poison in the bloodstream. Michael's last evening in Chapter 1 is where the real terror reveals itself. He was told to lie down for a final observation. The hypnotist's voice floated over him like fog. He drifted, thinking of home, of the friends he would see in the morning. Then came the screams, not from him, but from the lab itself. Walls that should have been solid groaned. Shadows danced against the ceiling. And just before he lost consciousness, a whisper carved into his mind: "You will never wake up the same." He awoke the next morning, trembling, with a blank page in his notebook and a memory that felt stolen. Something inside him had shifted. Something invisible had taken root. Outside, the world was normal. People laughed. Buses ran on time. But Michael knew some horrors were invisible and their echoes never die. When Michael awoke the next morning, the world looked almost the same. Almost. The morning light felt too bright, colors too sharp, as if reality itself had been tuned to a higher frequency. The clock ticked slower than it should, and when he looked into the mirror, he swore his reflection blinked half a second too late. He stumbled through the day trying to remember what had happened in the lab, but every memory dissolved like mist when he tried to grasp it. His professors said he had missed classes for a week, but he remembered only a single night. A gap had opened in his timeline, and behind it something was breathing. Later that week, he was called back for a follow-up session. The same man in a grey suit met him in the hallway, tall, expressionless, his voice smooth and rehearsed. "Just some final tests," he said, "for your contribution to science." Michael wanted to refuse, but the man's tone carried an unspoken command that his body obeyed before his mind could resist. In the lab, the air smelled of chemicals and cold metal. Strange machines hummed softly, lights pulsing in sync with his heartbeat. A new doctor introduced herself, Dr. Keller, calm and professional, eyes too calm to be human. She asked him questions that didn't make sense. "Do you still hear the voices? What color is the sound of your dreams? When you think of your mother, does her face look the same as before?" Each question chipped at the edges of his sanity. When they injected the clear liquid into his arm, he felt warmth spread like a burning fog through his veins. The room rippled. The walls breathed. Dr. Keller's voice split into two, one soothing, one whispering from inside his skull. Then came the visions. He was falling through corridors of light, hearing laughter that wasn't human. Faces from his childhood floated by, smiling, then melting into static. His hands stretched and twisted into shadows. And through it all, a voice, low, mechanical, insistent: "You are data. You are an instrument. You are not real." When he came to, he was strapped to a metal chair, surrounded by flickering projectors. Dozens of faces appeared on the walls, other subjects, blank-eyed, twitching, whispering the same words under their breath. Some cried, some laughed. One man tried to claw his way out, only to be restrained by men in white coats. Michael screamed. No sound came out. The drug paralyzed his body but left his mind open, raw, exposed. They flooded him with images: war, death, symbols flashing faster than his eyes could register. register. His memories fractured like glass. He saw himself from above, sitting in that chair, a puppet twitching on invisible strings. Hours or days passed. He no longer knew time. When they finally released him, his mind was hollowed out. Words had lost meaning. He couldn't remember his last name, the street he lived on, or the face of his sister. Outside the lab, the world moved on as if nothing had happened. The project's name, MKUltra, existed only in coded files and whispers. The scientists congratulated themselves on progress. They logged their notes about cognitive reprogramming and memory deletion as if they weren't dismantling living souls. But cracks began to show. Subjects started vanishing. Some went mad in public, screaming about invisible watches, about experiments that erased their dreams. Few disappeared entirely. Their families told they had died in accidents. Michael tried to rebuild his life, but reality no longer fit. He heard static when people spoke. Streetlights flickered when he walked beneath them. Sometimes he saw words floating in midair. Test subject 47A. And then, one night, he received a letter. No return address. Just a single line typed on yellowing paper. They're still watching you, Michael. You never really left. He looked out his window. Across the street, a black car idled in the rain, its headlights off. Inside, two silhouettes sat motionless, waiting. Michael felt the same whisper crawl through his skull. The one from the lab, the one that promised he'd never wake up the same. The experiment isn't over. Rain drummed against the windows as Michael sat in the dark, staring at the letter. Each drop sounded like a ticking clock counting down to something unseen. He hadn't slept in days. When he closed his eyes, he saw the lab again. White light, steel walls, voices whispering numbers in his head. He tried to tell himself it was just paranoia, the residue of trauma. But then the phone rang. A distorted voice spoke on the other end. Michael Turner, Project MKUltra, Phase 2. The line went dead. He ran outside, but the street was empty. The car that had been watching him was gone, leaving only the echo of its tires fading into the night. Days blurred into weeks. Michael stopped going to classes. He barely ate. The few people who tried to visit found him mumbling about tests and voices in the static. When the police finally entered his apartment, they found every wall covered in writing, endless strings of numbers, names, fragments of memory scrawled in black marker. Among them, one phrase appeared over and over again. The experiment never ended. Across the country, strange things began to happen. A woman in Seattle claimed her husband had started speaking in a language he'd never learned. A soldier in Virginia woke up screaming every night, saying he could hear commands in his dreams. And a former government employee, before disappearing, confessed to a reporter that MKUltra didn't die, it just changed names. The story was buried. Files vanished. The reporter was found drowned in his car, ruled an accident. But fragments of truth still leaked. Hidden documents, half-burned memos, and old VHS tapes showing experiments on unwitting civilians. Faces blurred, voices distorted, and among them, one recording stood out, time-stamped 1973, labeled Subject 47A, Cognitive Reassembly. The man in the chair was unmistakable. It was Michael. The footage showed him restrained, pupils dilated, murmuring softly as a voice off-screen spoke. Subject responsive, memory cleared, conditioning successful. Then Michael looked directly into the camera, as if seeing across time, and whispered, "You're next." Decades later, in 1995, the CIA publicly admitted the existence of Project MKUltra. They called it a mistake, a product of its era. They released thousands of pages of censored files, black bars covering names, places, and outcomes. But for every page shown, 100 were destroyed, and those who had lived through it, if they could still be called alive, were scattered, broken minds stitched together by fragments of who they once were. Some wandered hospitals, muttering about flashing lights and voices behind walls. Some simply vanished, and a few kept hearing the whisper. In 2002, a college professor cleaning out an old storage facility found a locked metal case. Inside were dozens of reels labeled Behavioral Conditioning Program. One reel contained a final note scrawled on yellow paper. If you are reading this, the program has already moved on. New methods, new names, same purpose. The professor turned the reel over and froze. It wasn't film. It was a recording, a modern digital drive, dated just 2 months prior. Somewhere in the city, in a windowless room, monitors flickered to life. Dozens of faces appeared. Students, workers, ordinary people, each being observed, analyzed, and recorded. A technician in a grey suit adjusted his headset and said quietly, "Phase 2 is complete. Begin integration protocol." A faint static hum filled the room. Through the speakers, a voice whispered words once heard by Michael Turner decades ago. "You will never wake up the same." Outside, the world carried on as usual. Children walked to school. Radios played cheerful songs. And somewhere, deep in the invisible machinery of history, the experiment continued, unseen, unheard, alive. Because some horrors aren't buried. They just evolve.